You're listening to Edge Radio TV. The views and opinions expressed in this program are that of the hosts or guests, and not the Edge Radio Network or its advertisers or affiliates.
E.R.A.S.E is an organization. It's a movement. We're talking about unity. We're talking about unity. So we're aimed to taking down the system of race by educating, enlightening, informing, and positively debating with those who have counterviews.
Welcome to Edge Radio's Talk About Unity. I'm Carlin Charleston, Executive Director of E.R.A.S.E, and I'm glad to be here. And as you can see from the setup today, I'm going solo. I'm in the middle of the screen, so I've got it going on. I've got it happening. And I want to introduce you to our show today that we've entitled Dialogue, the Art of Effective Communication. So today we basically going to talk about how to talk about talking. All right, so that's what we got on tap for you today. And so get ready for that, the art of effective communication. We got lots of issues in our society, and I think that they're all wrapped around this issue of how we're communicating with each other. So I'm excited to be here today. Richard, my co-host, my faithful co-host, who's always here by my side, is out on vacation today. So want to wish him and his family a great time today. And I just want to thank you all for joining me today. So, but before we get started on that topic of talking about how to talk about talk, the art of effective communication, just want to cover something. I'm a regular online subscriber to Merriam-Webster Online Dictionary. Yeah, that's for geeks and nerds, but every now and then they give you some really good information. And so they came across, I just noticed as they sent, their monthly newsletter they sent across, then they were talking about race and ethnicity. Of course, that's in my area because I talk about race and I run E.R.A.S.E as the executive director. And it was making a statement about the differentiation between race and ethnicity. And I thought it was important for people to understand what that really means and what they're talking about when they do that. So if you could, Vince, go ahead and post that race and ethnicity graphic. These are the words that they identified there. They said the term race is understood today as primarily a sociological designation that identifies a group sharing some outward physical characteristics and some commonalities of culture and history, while ethnicity is a word for something you acquire based on where your family is from and the group which you share cultural, traditional, and familial bonds and experiences. So that's it's pretty deep, but there's some key things that I want to cover as part of that, and three specific things that I want to cover. There are 3 points about that, and it talked about the fact, number one, it says that race is a sociological description. So we know that as better defined as a social construct, which means that it was invented. It was invented for some particular purpose at some particular time. And that's important for people to understand because most people think automatically we're born in race, and it's almost like, in the beginning God created heaven and earth and race. But that's not true. That is not what happened. Race is a man-made phenomenon. So you can see that first one. It says race is a sociological description, a social construct. Someone created that at some point in time. So we got to keep that in mind when we think of the use of race. Because the second point there, when it talks about it, says it's based on physical characteristics and some commonalities of culture and history. Some commonalities of culture and history. And so the key part of that is the physical characteristics. Race carries with it implicitly this idea that I'm going to group you based on something I see. Now that's kind of tough for us to fathom because what you see can be very confusing. And you get that, I've always used the example of you've got African Americans and you've got Indians from the country of India. And while they have similar skin tones, and in some cases one can be darker than the other either way, those commonalities though keep them separated in the race paradigm, though they both have the same color skin. So race then has this commonality of some physical, but also some cultural. All right. So some cultural, some physical, and that's where it really gets confusing, because you can find people that it's not just race. And so when you come to a multicultural society such as America is, then it becomes really confusing, because when you call someone a black person and you call someone a white person, and it seems like those are the only binary options, then what happens to those people who are Indians and Mexicans who have skin that is as dark? It kind of leaves them out in la la land. And so very, very confusing. So race, as it says there, it's based on physical characteristics and some commonalities of culture and history. And the third point it makes there is it says ethnicity is ancestral. And that's the key. That's a big differentiation there, because now when you talk about ethnicity, and everybody who's gone out and done their DNA and done their 23andMe and all those things, then they've probably come to understand this, that when you begin looking at that, then you realize you're connected with far more people than just those who have physical characteristics in common with you. So you're connected with people from a lot of different cultures. You know, I did my DNA, and of course it said 80% African, but then when it broke that further down, it went down to the countries, and it talked about 60 or 43% Nigerian, 16% Ghana, but then there's 16% of it was European. So you bring in some of these other things. And so you then understand that nothing is captured totally by your physical, which would be identified as in this thing that we call race, that is much deeper than that. And so ethnicity carries something a whole lot deeper, because it does in fact have your ancestral ties, and it has your DNA, and it has all that background information, which is very important to understanding basically who you truly are. And so think of that, and think about that in the context when I talk about the idea of erasing race. Why would we then want to erase race? Because the chief reason, of course, is the detriment that it has been to our society. Because here it is, and this is the one that you need to carry away. This is the takeaway for the day. Race, by definition, because of the way it was created, automatically stratifies society. What do I mean? It creates a hierarchy, and that hierarchy says that one color is more supreme at the top and one color is at the very bottom. And then based on those shades, you can run up and down that stratification, that spectrum. So, and you know when I say this, exactly what I'm talking about. It was created for that particular reason. So race, remember we said at the beginning, a social construct created, and was created for a particular reason. And it was, in fact, to stratify American society so that you could have effective control of other people groups. And at the top of that hierarchy was, of course, the race that we call and we refer to as white, man-made construction, and at the bottom, of course, was black. That's exactly why it was created. And so that's why we talk about erasing race. And that's why most people will say, well, yeah, but it's race, but you can use it for this and it can be good. It's almost like saying you can make good out of this bad thing. It's a tool that was created for these purposes, and it was built for this particular purpose and this reason. And so that's why it's got to be erased and not used, because it carries with it. And we've been fighting against that. Think about it, the last, I'm not talking about 400 years. I'm talking about the last 40 or 50 years. We've been fighting because when we come up with solutions, we come up with solutions that are based on the idea of race. So we try to use this thing, which automatically, when a person identifies and says, well, I am white, but I'm an okay white, and I have white privilege, and I have white guilt, and I have white, you're automatically, by virtue of you saying that, saying, I'm at the top, and you're somewhere below. So we never start out in the society when we come up with solutions. We never start out on a level playing field, because by virtue of the fact that we use the terminology of race, we are automatically placing ourselves in one of those positions of lower or higher. Now, if I'm placing I'm black and you did this to me and you owe me, that means then we never start out even, because I'm starting from a place of disadvantage. You start from a place of advantage. And that's just not the way that we're created. We're really created as all human beings. And that's what it was talking about. That's why I say Thomas Jefferson was right when he said all men are created equal. And most people will argue with that because we had slavery going on at the time. But in reality, that is in fact true. and being made in the image of God. We call it the Imago Dei. We are all equal. But man came and created circumstances, situations in society that began to say, I'm up here, you're down here. And so we've got that stratification, that hierarchy, and that's what we're fighting against in our society today. So that's the issue of race. And understand that there's race and there's ethnicity. And we got more of this happening today, because today is pretty much because it's Carlin's show today, because Richard's not here. I don't have any guests. So we're going to have school today. And so we've talked about race and ethnicity, talked about the differences there. The remainder of the show, we're going to talk about how to talk about talk, how to communicate effectively with other people, because that's one of our big problems in society. So that's where we're going to be when we come back after this break. We're going to dig into it. We're going to talk about the art of dialogue, effective communication. And that's what's going to happen here on today's Talk About Unity. We'll see you in a few. Hello, I'm Carlin Charleston, Executive Director of E.R.A.S.E, and I want to take this time to invite you to an opportunity to change the world. Perhaps you're too busy and too preoccupied to help change the world, but please take the next 2 minutes to listen to how we plan to do it. The divisiveness and bitterness observed in our country today is not a coincidence of the current administration or any administration before. It is also not a product of a singular or multiple infractions by a zealous or racist police force. No, the race problem precedes the founding of our country. Our very history speaks in racial language, and most everything that happens in our society now carries with it racial baggage. It simply does not have to stay that way. The Erase Race campaign has only one objective: the unifying of all Americans, and that without regard to the color of their skin. This is a difficult challenge because of our history, but we can do it if we believe. If we believe that Martin Luther King Jr. was right when he said, "We are tied together in a single garment of destiny," we can do it. We can do it if we believe the founding principles upon which our country was built, that all men are created equal, we can do it. And if we believe that God did in fact make all nations of men from one man, and that we are all therefore part of one family, one race, then we can do it. Yes, the task is monumental, but the reward is worth the challenge. If you would like to join us as we change America and inevitably change the world, go to eraseraces.com, sign up today, and welcome to Erase Races, because there is only one race and you're in it.
Edge Radio TV is holding auditions for new show hosts. Are you a subject matter expert, professional, influencer, book author, thought leader, or business owner with an educational or motivational platform? Then we want to meet you. Send a link of some of your work to edgeradio20@gmail.com and be sure to put audition in the subject line. Join the Edge Radio TV family. Edge TV, because truth still matters.
And welcome back to Talk About Unity. And today's show is, in fact, Talk About How to Talk. And so we're talking about dialogue, the art of effective communication here on Talk About Unity today. I'm going solo today, Carlin Charleston here. My co-host is once again out on vacation, but I've got enough information here to really keep you, I think, entertained today and educated, because today's show really is informational as we talk about how to talk. It doesn't take you long to really think about how we're such in need of learning how to more effectively communicate it, how this dialogue thing actually works. And I'm going to really focus on that word dialogue, because I think a lot of what we do, we take to be dialogue, and it is in fact not dialogue. It's one person. Matter of fact, most of it is that, in fact, monologue rather than dialogue, and there's a big difference between the two there. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. Whether you're on social media, and especially social media, whatever you're on, you can easily go and find someone who has just basically miscommunicated. We just miscommunicate because we get on there, and more than anything, we monologue and we pontificate. If you remember The Incredibles in the show, they had the villain would stand there and he'd say, you caught me monologuing, because I'm standing there, I'm just giving out one-way information, and I'm not listening or hearing anything else anybody else is saying. So that's frequently what happens. And whether it's in our social media, whether it's in Congress, the things that people do there, and even in our daily interactions, just going to the grocery store and things like that, we don't understand the significance that really takes place when in fact we are in fact doing this thing that we call dialogue. So let's look at this thing about dialogue, and we want to begin with a few of the reasons why we may have trouble communicating in the area of dialogue. All right, so we want to think about those things, and let's look at them here for a second. I've got 3 particular reasons, and these are reasons that I came up with why I think we might have trouble at times dialoguing. And the first one, as we look at that, post that up, it says our issues. We have what's called ontological issues. That's a big word, but it talks about our sense of being. It talks about understanding who we are, and what happens is we need to be affirmed in that. I have one friend who does some work, and he considers himself an expert, so he always emphasizes that he's an expert. So he wants people to acknowledge that and understand that and take everything that he says as he says it, because he's an expert. Well, that's called an ontological concern, because it says you need to affirm that, and then we can kind of go forward. So that's one example, but we have lots of issues. All of us have some of these issues where we need to be affirmed, and if we don't realize that when we begin dialoguing, then we're actually trying to get some needs met through our conversation, and we don't realize that. So that's it. We've got issues, and there's a laundry list. Yourself personally, you've got a list of issues that you have to deal with, and some people don't know theirs as well, and so you need to really find that out. What are really my issues? See, I tell you what, if you're like me and you're married, ask your wife, and she will tell you what your issues are. She'll tell you. So I know. All right, so we have issues. The second reason is it's our education. We have varying levels of knowledge on how to do these things. And so we don't always use the words that we should use. We don't always convey the meaning that we think we're conveying when we use certain words. And so our educational level keeps us from having successful communication in a lot of ways. And so people are sometimes confused because we think we're saying something, and what the hearer receives on the other end is quite different than what we think we're sending out. So our education and our ability to speak well is sometimes the reason that we have trouble communicating. And then we have the third reason, and is those same issues that you have and that same education that you have, the person who's receiving has that as well. And so you're not just giving out, even if you're an expert communicator, even if you have dealt with your issues and you're communicating, the person receiving could have the same on their end. They might have their issues with receiving, and then they might have their issues of understanding. And so you factor those 3 things out, then it's no surprise that we would have a lot of trouble when it comes down to actually communicating. So that's why dialogue, and this term that we're talking about today, is so important. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to tell you today the answer to everything that we just talked about, and the things that we're going to talk about later on in the show. The answer is in that one word: dialogue. So we're going to talk about dialogue and what that really means. And so let's begin with looking at the dictionary definition of the word. And so once again, here's where Merriam-Webster comes in very handy for me, because Merriam-Webster, and this is actually from Merriam-Webster, and it says exactly the thing that I was talking about. It says it's a conversation, and you got 2 different versions of this. You've got the noun and you've got the verb, and you can see that they have kind of 2 different meanings when you're talking about that dialogue. So the noun version talks about the meaning a conversation between 2 or more peoples as part of a movie, book, or play. When you watch a movie, you sit there and go, oh yeah, they're in great conversation. Yeah, they're having dialogue. And you can see the quality of movies by that dialogue. If you think this isn't important, think about some movies that you've seen where there was really not a lot of action happening, but there was just these people talking. And when they finished talking, I think about the movie Green Book. I went to see Green Book, and man, they had this conversation between these two guys. And I remember the one guy said at the end, he said, it's not about doing anything strong. He said it takes courage. They were talking about how to integrate and do the things he was doing racially. He said it takes courage. And when they finished talking, we went, ooh, that was deep. Just because of the dialogue that this guy was having. He was stressed out at this point, and he started articulating his view on life, and just that dialogue. And so dialogue is huge as a noun, because it's that conversation that people have when they're just having a conversation, whether it's a book, a movie, or play. That is the noun version of dialogue. And then we've got the verb version of dialogue, and that's one that's really big. I don't think a lot of us realize when we're communicating that the verb part here is the part that's so important, because it's the part where you're solving a problem, because it's defined as taking part in a conversation or discussion in order to resolve a problem. So it just simply means taking part in a conversation to solve a problem. That's a lot different, because in that other dialogue where you're just doing that, it's the dialogue itself that is the subject of the issue. You're just communicating these things. But when you are dialoguing, then you're dialoguing with a particular purpose, and that purpose is to resolve a problem. Now, we might think that every conversation we have is not about solving a problem, but I would argue with you on that. Think about this. When you go into a restaurant, let's just go to Burger King. You can call it Burger King or wherever your favorite restaurant is. When you go in, that conversation that you have with that cashier, that clerk, or you go to talk about Walmart or something like that. That conversation that you have is about resolving a problem. Well, you might say it's not a problem, but it's you got to resolve this situation, because the situation is, I am going to interact with you so that we can transact this business so that I can be on my way. I give you money, you say thank you, and I head out with my goods. And so that's the issue that you're trying to resolve, and you don't think it's an issue, but when you go into Walmart or Burger King and then that clerk has a wrong attitude, then you realize how important dialogue is. Because what's your next statement? Let me see your manager. And you want to go see the manager because, of course, that one didn't go right. So when dialogue is not important, and when somebody says that dialogue isn't important and they don't take it as important and serious, and it goes bad, then you realize how important it really is. And so that's that verb version that we're talking about, and they really work together, because if you've got really good dialogue and you've got the skills necessary for dialogue that's happening between two people in a play or in a movie, then you understand. And because sometimes that'll have an effect on you. You'll go, man, if I could talk that way, if I could communicate that way. It's kind of like when you hear a speaker. You've heard a great speaker, and they gave a great speech, and then when you ask a question of them, and they're able to really answer your question well. I talk about, and this is not a plug for Edge Radio, but I talk about Oscar Hines here, who runs Edge Radio, and when he does an interview, then he gives you the ultimate in dialogue with the questions and with your opportunity to feedback, because it's not just about the way that you ask the questions, it's asking it so that you get maximum from the person who receives it, and they're able to give you great feedback. So that's really good stuff, and that's the art of dialogue, and so that's what we're really going to talk about today on this show. And so we've got this 3-point process that I want to talk about, because I've talked about what dialogue is, and I talked about how necessary that is as a skill, and making sure that you have that interaction. And let me give you one more example, and we'll go to break, and then we'll start on the process of dialogue when we come back after that break. But I use this example, and see, I've got a lot of these. I watch movies, and mostly you'd probably say the kid movies. There was this movie called Zootopia. And in Zootopia, then they went to the Department of Public Safety. And like the Department of Public Safety, I guess around the country has a reputation. And its reputation is being slow, and that you got to wait in line, you got to wait forever. And in Zootopia, they had the attendants working at the Department of Public Safety as sloths. And if you know what a sloth is, then sloths move really slowly. They move really slowly. And they had them talking really slowly. And so that's just the issue of dialogue, because in the issue of dialogue, when a person goes to the Department of Public Safety, they're trying to communicate something that, hey, they're trying to do this thing that we talked about, resolve a problem. You're trying to go in there and get your driver's license. You're trying to get whatever's necessary for me to get in and get out. You got to take an eye test. You got to take your fingerprint, and you're ready to get out of there. If that person is really slow, excessively slow in getting it done, which Department of Public Safety is notorious for being slow, then you get upset. And so that is part of this dialogue, because what you don't realize is that we have now prohibited our ability to solve this problem. That's because I went in there with this issue to solve my problem. I needed an updated driver's license. I needed to get a fingerprint on file or whatever, and I could not do that successfully. So that's what's happening in dialogue. And so think about it in everyday conversations. Whatever you do, then dialogue is important. So that's why we're going to start when we come back after this break talking about the process of dialogue. You're going to understand exactly how to make that process more effective and more efficient in your own lives and more beneficial for you and the person you're dialoguing with. So we'll talk about that when we come back from this break on Talk About Unity.
Are you a small business owner concerned about the downturn in the economy? Top business leaders like Mattress Mac and Warren Buffett will tell you that now is the time to promote your business more than ever. People need your services. Your business needs an edge. Learn about special advertising packages for small businesses right here on Edge Radio. Find out more, give us a call at 281-744-0446. That's 281-744-0446. Edge, because truth still matters.
And we're back on Talk About Unity, talking about talk. Today we're talking about dialogue, that word dialogue. We define what dialogue means, and so if you're going to have to rewind on this show if you didn't get that definition, because we're going to go on now and we're going to talk about this process of dialogue, because dialogue is in fact a process. And before we talk about that, I want to tell you that dialogue is it. Dialogue is important, and it is serving you well or is serving you poorly based on the dialogue skills that you use. And so that's why it's going to be important for you to pay attention to these things that we're going to talk about today, because we're going to talk about the process of dialogue right now. And so I want to bring up some process points, and I've got 3 process points. Today is the day of 3s. I got 3 of everything. All right, so we have 3 of these particular process points, and the first process point is this one, where it says dialogue takes 2. We've talked about monologue and dialogue, and you know mono, which means 1, di, which means 2, and that's what's so important, because most people spend most of their times, even when they're in a conversation, they don't understand they're monologuing. Why? Because the conversation is about them. You've probably met people like this where the conversation's about them. They'll make a statement, and then when you begin offering your viewpoint, their next statement is once again about them. It's about their viewpoint, and they're trying to get you solely to be focused in on the views and statements that they're making. What happens differently in dialogue is that there's that giving and that receiving. It's that push and it's that pull. It's that, yin and that yang, and that's what dialogue is about. That's why even when it comes to an issue such as politics, I tell people that it's really kind of beneficial that we have Democrats and Republicans. It's kind of beneficial that we have a left and a right. It's beneficial that we have up and down. It's because that's where you get people that are in the middle there who can receive from both sides. And if we understood that, then whether we are on the far left or far right, we would open ourselves up to receive from the other side. And not just what happens is when we're on those extreme and those polar ends of the spectrum, we end up monologuing and only going one way. But the key is that the dialogue gives us the opportunity, and it is just an opportunity for us to see it as a two-way street rather than just a one-way street that happens in monologue. So it takes 2. Dialogue is important because it takes 2. There's that give and take. And the second part of that second process point is this one. You got it for me right there? I'm waiting. There we go. First impressions matter. When you're dialoguing, it's so important that you understand in the process that you get kind of one chance to make a first impression. You don't get 2 chances at a first impression. It's that first one. And so when you're dialoguing, it's very important that you give yourself out to be someone who wants to enter into the dialogue. Because when that first thing that they receive from you, if it's that, no, I don't want to deal with you today, then dialogue's not going to happen. And just like we were talking about that cashier instance at Walmart or at the store, and you go in, that first impression, that can go very badly simply based on the response that either the customer or the clerk gives. And that's the key about what we made in point 1, process point 1, that it takes 2. Either one in the dialogue can make that a very bad situation. All right, so you both have a responsibility in a dialogue to make that situation happen well. And so first impressions, the initial statement, and that's why dialogue is important, because every statement, everything that you say matters, and especially the first thing that you say matters. And then we'll go to that process point number 3. The process point number 3, if you don't understand that you have this objective of problem solving, then you're probably not going to get the most out of your dialogue. Because what you will understand out of dialogue is that I need that other person. I need to receive from them in order for us to solve this problem. Then dialogue in itself, in its purest form, is then about us coming together, not just to talk, but to resolve problems. Now think about this. We've got in Congress what we've called we've got a bicameral Congress. That means we've got a House of the Senate and we got a House of Representatives. And those 2 people are to enact this thing that we call dialogue, because they are to come together and legislate and create laws. And so that's a great example of what should be happening in dialogue. Now, what happens when that dialogue fails? And we've seen that over the years, regardless of what age you are. You've seen that in our Congress. You've seen when they have not been able to have constructive conversation to what? Solve problems. Then you have a problem with dialogue. And you get a lot of people saying, I want it to go my way, and they don't care about the others. And sometimes they just say, we're going to go it alone. The Republicans are going to go it alone. The Democrats are going to go it alone. They have failed at the art of dialogue. This can also happen in your marriage. It can happen in your relationships. If you decide, I don't want to talk anymore, I'm done talking. And you might have said that before in your life, but the minute you're done communicating, the minute you're done trying to solve the problem that you both have, and that's the key thing that we pointed out there in the process, it's a problem solving, and it's a problem for both of us. And so if you don't understand that it's a problem for both of you, then you're not going to be vested in trying to solve it, because you might say, and you might have heard yourself say this before, that's your problem. That means you are not part of the solution. That means you are not part of the dialogue process, because you're leaving that problem solving up to one side or one party in the conflict. So those are the processes that we're talking about when we talk about dialogue. The dialogue has a process, and so we're going to talk about the benefit. There are some benefits also to dialogue. So dialogue doesn't happen in a vacuum just to solve problems. And while problem solving is a huge benefit, that's a huge benefit, but there are other benefits to the dialogue. And so once again, as I've got three of everything, then I want to go to the three benefits of dialogue. So benefit one, let's look at that benefit one. The benefit of dialogue here is the value that you begin placing in others. Man, that is huge. You don't understand what that does. It enables not only further dialogue, but connection. And man, there are so many good examples that I could talk about of that. But you got to really understand that when you are actually not dialoguing, then you are in fact exploiting. And so what do I mean when I talk about that? This is the essence of how dialogue plays itself out in every day. Let's think about the idea of slavery. So while slavery was everybody knows what slavery was and what it represents. It is the ultimate in lack of dialogue, because when a slave master or someone says, hey, you have to do this, and gives that requirement to them to perform, that is the ultimate in them not having an opportunity to respond back, which would happen in dialogue. So remember, we talked about it's a give and take. When you give an order, then there should be a response from the receiver in their compliance or in the way that they will execute your order that you gave them. And so the ultimate in slavery is that the people received orders and they have no ability to respond back, and that results in exploitation. So think about how that can happen anytime in a parent-child relationship. It can happen in an employer-employee relationship. And so those things can still happen today. It can happen in just your relationships you have with people. You can exploit them, and you exploit them when you don't execute dialogue. You exploit them when you say, do this, and I don't care how you feel about what I just said. I only want you to do the thing that I said, because there's no opportunity for respond back. So that is exploitation, and it's not part of dialogue. And so one of the benefits that you have in dialogue is that you have the person receiving a certain amount of value, and they get that value from the fact that you are giving them an opportunity to respond. And just like I talked about Oscar before, man, when he sets you up for that question, he lays it out for you, and man, you feel great about responding. That's dialogue. When you feel excited about that you have an opportunity to respond to this person, and that comes from you. When you give that question or when you make that statement, then that comes from you. That is not something that comes from the person responding. It is what you give as the speaker. When you are speaking to someone, you're giving that to the hearer. You can then assign that value in the way that you communicate to them, in the things that you say, and the way that you say it. So that's important. That's benefit number one, that value is assigned. And remember earlier, this all works together because we talked about these ontological concerns. I have these issues. I need you to feel affirmed. Sometimes just because of the way that you said something to someone, they feel valued, and not only are they excited about responding, but you have changed their life with just the words that you speak. And so that's why that's so important. And so because I got a lot I want to talk about on these next two benefits, and so we're gonna take a break, and I'll cover those in the final segment. So let's take a break. We're gonna come back. We're talking about dialogue and the art of effective communication. We've talked about the process. We talked about some of the benefits, and we're gonna finish those benefits when we come back right after this on Talk About Unity.
We work our whole lives to support our families. With one accident or illness, it can all be gone in an instant. Now there's a smart, affordable way to protect your family. Go to findhealthbenefits.com and discover low-cost life insurance for as little as $2 per month. Add to that a tax-deferred annuity that can help you protect your assets and grow your money for retirement. Learn more. Go to findhealthbenefits.com. or call 877-235-6094. A critical illness can strike without warning and wipe out your life savings. In fact, it's the #1 reason for bankruptcy. Find Health Benefits offers an affordable solution. Get up to $50,000 if you get cancer, stroke, or a heart attack, giving you the peace of mind to focus on getting better while the plan helps you to pay your bills and medical expenses. Learn more. Go to findhealthbenefits.com or call 877-235-6094. 66% of seniors spend more time shopping for cable TV than Medicare plans. Most say because it's just too confusing. Laws change every year. The wrong plan could cost you thousands and prevent you from seeing the doctors you want. Introducing findhealthbenefits.com. Save time, save money, see specialists without referrals. Go to findhealthbenefits.com or call 877-235-6094 for this informative brochure.
Society is on the edge. Let's bring them back. Edge Radio, because truth still matters.
Hey y'all, I'm Robin B.
And I'm Dr. Kiva.
And we just want to know
how you living?
Join us every Monday
At noon Central Standard Time.
here on Edge Radio TV. Take care.
When people stop talking to each other, society is on the edge. Let's bring them back. Edge Radio, because truth still matters.
Edge Radio TV is holding auditions for new show hosts. Are you a subject matter expert, professional, influencer, book author, thought leader, or business owner with an educational or motivational platform? Then we want to meet you. Send a link of some of your work to edgeradio20@gmail.com and be sure to put audition in the subject line. Join the Edge Radio TV family. Edge TV, because truth still matters.
Aren't you tired of not getting what you want in bed?
Are you ready to spice things up behind those closed doors?
Woo! We're here for you every hump day at 7 p.m.
This is Sex on the Edge with Jen and Hen. I'm Jennifer Reeves.
And I'm Hendrik Scott, and we are professional licensed sex therapists.
So remember to watch us Wednesday at 7 p.m. on Edge Radio TV, just in time for sexy time.
And we're back here on Talk About Unity, where we're talking about dialogue and how important that is in your life. You need dialogue. And so we're covering that today on Edge Radio's Talk About Unity. I'm Carlin Charleston here, and as I'm closing out this show, got some really important points that I want to cover here, because we've talked about the process. And one of the things that when we were talking about that process, I made a point about the fact that first impressions are really important. And I talked about how it's part of problem solving. And I want to give you one example of a time that I made I don't know if I made a great first impression, but just a connection that I made once. And it was a very simple, but it's an example of what happens when you actually connect in dialogue. I was, one morning got up, my wife and I were headed somewhere, and we stopping to get her some coffee at McDonald's. And so I pulled the car up, I ran inside, and coffee's very cheap at McDonald's. I had $1, whatever, but whatever the cost was, I needed like a nickel or something, some small coinage. And I had just the dollar bill that I have, because I hardly ever use cash. I'm usually just carrying credit card. And so I was just in there with my that dollar bill, and I was like, and then and it's a line. You're in McDonald's, there's a line formed behind you, and you're like, oh my goodness, I need a nickel, a dime, or whatever it was, and I don't have it. And it was one of those coinages where the clerk wasn't about to let it go. So I figured it wasn't a penny or something small, because they were looking like, well, you're going to have to do something before you get this coffee. And so I said, okay, well, let me run out to the car. Man, there was this lady in line behind me, and she said, oh, no, I've got it. And I said, no, that's all right. I said, I'll run out to the car and get it. She insisted. She said, no, let me get it. And so she gives me the coinage that I need. I give it to them, and I'm sitting there at the counter doing something else, and I slowed down the line doing something else, and I said, hey, if you gave me that quarter or dime or whatever, I said, least I could do is get out of the way, huh? And so we made this joke, and she said something else about it. She said, no, I really just, she said, I just liked helping you out in that situation. But she said something, and the way that she said it was so amazing that I was like, wow. It wasn't just one of those things where somebody gave you something and you moved on. You were like, that was really cool, the way she said it. And I can't remember the exact verbiage, but it was so amazing. And let me tell you the rest of the story, why it was so amazing, because it was a connection made through dialogue and just the exchange, the give and take that we had there. That was something special. So special, when I went outside and I got in the car and gave my wife the coffee, I told her about the exchange. And I said, there was this lady in line behind me, and I said, she ended up giving me change that I needed to purchase the coffee, because I needed a nickel or a dime or whatever. She gave me that. I said, and it was the way that she talked. I said, she was just so kind and polite. And we just had a great exchange there. I said, I made a joke about something, and it's like we were best friends forever. And my wife said this. She said, was it the lady that had on this color shirt or whatever? She said, I noticed when she came out, she had this countenance that was just amazing, and so I was like, wow, maybe that lady was an angel or something, because my wife just happened to notice this lady when she came out for no particular reason, and she had this certain look. And so that's what I think happens when we have real dialogue. And if you've never had it, then you don't understand what I'm talking about. But if you've ever had it, then you understand that you've met somebody. Because sometimes it happens with people that you know, but sometimes it's strangers and people that you connect immediately, and you go, that's a person I want to know more. That's a person I'd love to talk to for another hour or so, because you made that type of connection. So that's what we're talking about today when we talk about this thing about dialogue. And so I covered some of that in the processes, but we got into this third thing where we talked about the benefit of dialogue. We had covered benefit number one. We talked about the fact that it allows you to really value others, because it's in that receiving that people feel valued. And like when the lady, I wasn't valued because the lady gave me some money or a nickel or a dime to get coffee. That's not why I felt value. I felt value in the way that she interacted with me. She treated me like I was someone special, and I responded in kind. And so I think that's our challenge in dialogue. Can you treat people as valuable when you talk to them, when you begin dialoguing with them? And if you do, you'll value what they have to say to you as well as what you're saying to them. All right. So that's number one, you value others. And let's get to number two. Number two, we talked about the benefit about first impressions mattering. Oh, it removes all stereotypes and defenses. That's what we're talking about. Go further down. Go down again, Vince. We want to talk about removing stereotypes and defenses. When you really value, when you really go understand the benefit of dialogue, that's what it does. Because otherwise, what it does is, if you don't dialogue, then you come in not with what the person is saying to you, but with the preconceived notion or idea that you had of the person. You're coming in with the rumor, the innuendo that you had, that someone else gave you of who this person is. They might say, our producer, they might say, Vince is this way, Vince is that way. And when I begin dialoguing and talking to Vince, if I hold that information, I don't give Vince an opportunity for me to find out who he really is, because I am not dialoguing. In fact, I'm actually coming in with a prejudice, a stereotype, or my own preconceived notion or prejudgment of who Vince is based on what I heard. So think about the benefit of dialogue, where you come in and you find out who that person really is that I'm in conversation with. Not with who I think they are, not with who somebody else told me they were, but I give that person an opportunity to reveal their truest selves to me, to reveal who they really are to me. And then I receive them as they actually are, and not as how I thought they were or how someone else told me they were. That is huge. That doesn't happen a lot in life. And think about it. When you begin talking to people, you go with their reputation. That's why when we think of celebrities, we think we really know them. And then sometimes somebody says, I met this person and I didn't like them at all. Because why? Because we went in with this notion. We went in with the character that they played. Denzel Washington is great in this movie. I went up and met him. He wasn't. No, I've heard Denzel Washington is really a great person, period. So I'm not making this. But I'm talking about the example of all women think Denzel is the man. He's the man, and he seems to live that out in everyday life. But you could meet him, and one time he could, you could upset him, and he might not be the person that you thought he was. Well, this can happen in life because we come up with our preconceived ideas of what we think and what we've heard about people, and so we're not dealing with the real person. All right, so that's number two. The benefit of dialogue is that you remove the stereotypes. It allows people to drop their defenses and actually meet the real person. The real person, and it becomes authentic, and your relationships are built from that. And our final benefit is the one that we covered earlier in the process. It's the fact that it solves problems. And that's what it's really about. Problems, that's the ultimate objective of life, is that when we come together and we begin talking with each other, then we do that for a purpose. We got an objective. And when I'm saying good morning to my 4-year-old grandson that I've got at the house right now, then it's to what? It's to solve this problem with how his attitude's going to be that day. Because if you start out wrong with a 4-year-old, it can be a very bad day. And so we do that in our relationships. We do that with everybody. We want to make sure that we are solving problems in our communication and in our conversation when we have these with each other. All right, so that's very important. And let me tell you where the genesis of a lot of this. There's this book that I'm reading now called The Miracle of Dialogue, written in, I think the copyright is 1958. 1958. It is the most amazing book. It's by Reuel Howe, name spelled R-E-U-E-L, because I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing it correctly, but it's R-E-U-E-L, and the last name is H-O-W-E. And so if you can do a search on it, Reuel Howe, it's called The Miracle of Dialogue. The most amazing book I think that I've read outside of course, the Bible, which you can't get more amazing than that. But this book is really amazing because it talks about the miracle of dialogue and how when you really do dialogue right, and it's kind of like the example I gave you of the lady at McDonald's, when you do dialogue right, then it is a miracle. Something special happens, and I think that's why it's so important. And one of the things we're doing in E.R.A.S.E, as I put in this plug, is that we're coming up with a curriculum that we will be dispensing out very, very soon. And you can go to our website and get the updated information on it. But our curriculum, which is not ready yet, is called Dialogic Rules, The Art of Dialogue. And it's a curriculum that anyone will be able to use. We'll be able to facilitate that both in person, and we will have a virtual format an online format that you can use as well. And so stay tuned for that, because that's what we want to do. We want to really get people out. That's why we created this show, Talk About Unity, here on Edge Radio, because we think that a lot of the things that we think are problems are simply problems in the way that we communicate with each other. And so we're going to make it our intent to ensure that we are communicating more effectively, and we think that we can, in fact, change America. We can bring together the unity that we need if we get everyone to understand how important it is in the way that we talk with each other. And that is what we call the art of effective communication, dialogue. So hope on today's show you got a lot out of it. You didn't, rewind, go back and find some of these points are really good points. And if nothing else, look at that book, The Miracle of Dialogue. A lot of great information, because I think this is going to be the salvation of America, that we begin to not only deal with each other better, but more than anything, we communicate with each other better. We've got to learn to talk to each other, and that we can do, and that's what we're fostering here on Edge Radio's Talk About Unity. We'll see you next week. Hopefully we'll have Richard back in the studio so that we can meet again to bring the two edges together from the, because that's what we do on Edge Radio Network here at Talk About Unity. We'll see you next week. This is Carlin Charleston, and I'm out.